In the 1st century BCE, Rome, the most powerful republic on Earth, ruled millions. Its armies conquered continents. Its laws shaped civilization. Its legions crushed every rebellion. But one man, a slave, a gladiator, a nobody, did the impossible. He built an army from chains. He defeated Roman forces again and again. And for 2 terrifying years, Rome feared collapse. His name was Spartacus. And this is the true story of the rebellion Rome tried to forget. The Roman Republic depended on slavery. By the 1st century BCE, slaves filled farms, mines, homes, and workshops. Many were prisoners of war. Others were sold by debt or captured by pirates. To Rome, slaves were property, tools that could speak. But among all slaves, one group lived under a unique and terrifying fate: the gladiators. Gladiators were not simply fighters, they were entertainers trained for violence. Many were prisoners of war or rebellious slaves considered too dangerous for ordinary labor. They were sent to special schools called ludi, where they were trained to kill and to die for public spectacle. To Rome, this was entertainment. To the fighters, it was a life lived under the shadow of certain death. And here lay the Republic's greatest blind spot. Because gladiators were not helpless. They were trained warriors, physically strong, mentally hardened, used to discipline, combat, and survival. If such men ever chose to fight not for Rome, but against it, they could become something far more dangerous than slaves. They could become soldiers. And in Capua, in a gladiator school guarded by walls and iron gates, that transformation was about to begin. Long before Rome would fear his name, Spartacus was just another man born far from the heart of the Republic. He likely came from Thrace, a rugged region of hills, forests, and warrior tribes stretching across what is now parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. To the Romans, Thrace was a frontier land, fierce, unpredictable, and famous for producing tough fighters. Very little is known about Spartacus's early life. Whatever the truth, Spartacus lost his freedom. He was enslaved. Like thousands of others, he was transported in chains, marched across unfamiliar lands, and sold into the Roman slave system, a machine that turned human lives into economic assets. But Spartacus was not sent to a farm or a household. He was sold to a gladiator school in the city of Capua, one of the most famous training centers in Italy. Here, his fate changed again. The school, known as a ludus, was run like a prison combined with a military academy. High walls surrounded the compound. Cells were locked at night. Guards watched constantly. Inside, men trained to fight for the arena. They learned specialized combat styles, practiced with heavy wooden weapons, and endured relentless drills designed to build strength, stamina, and precision. Every movement was controlled, every mistake punished. Gladiators were expensive investments, and their owners expected returns. Yet Spartacus stood out among the trainees. He was not just a fighter. He was observant, calm under pressure, and most importantly, capable of inspiring others. Among them, Spartacus began to emerge as a natural leader. He understood the guards' routines. He saw the weaknesses in the system, and he recognized something few dared to imagine: a moment to act, a moment to break the chains, a moment to choose freedom over survival. And soon, that moment would come. By 73 BCE, tension inside the gladiator school at Capua had been building for months. The men trained there were warriors by profession, but prisoners by fate. They fought for survival, for the crowd's amusement, and for the profit of their owner, a lanista named Lentulus Batiatus. Locked behind walls, constantly watched, and facing near certain death in the arena, many had begun to think the unthinkable: escape. Around 200 men were involved in the early conspiracy. But secrecy is fragile. Before the plan could unfold, word reached the authorities. Guards were alerted. The opportunity seemed lost. With time running out, Spartacus and a much smaller group, roughly 70 to 80 men, chose to act immediately. They had no swords, no armor, no formal plan, only desperation. In the kitchens of the school, they seized whatever they could find, crude weapons, but enough for men trained to fight. Then they struck. The gladiators overwhelmed the guards, broke through the gates, and burst into the open countryside. For the first time, they were no longer prisoners, but they were still poorly armed fugitives, and Rome would soon be hunting them. Luck, however, was on their side. On the road outside Capua, they intercepted wagons transporting real gladiatorial equipment. Inside were swords, shields, helmets, and armor. What had begun as a desperate escape suddenly transformed into something far more dangerous. Now they were armed, now they were organized, and now they needed a defensible position. The rebels fled toward Mount Vesuvius, the towering volcano overlooking the region. Its steep slopes and rugged terrain made it a natural fortress, difficult for Roman forces to surround or assault. From there, Spartacus began to impose order. He divided the men into units, distributed weapons, and prepared for the inevitable Roman response. This was no longer just a group of runaway slaves. It was the beginning of an army. At first, Rome did not grasp the threat. To the Senate, this was merely a local disturbance, another minor slave escape that would soon be crushed. So instead of sending a full legion, Rome dispatched a relatively small local force under the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber. Glaber's mission was simple: surround the rebels, cut off their escape, and starve them into surrender. The Roman troops marched to Mount Vesuvius and positioned themselves at the most obvious path down the mountain, a narrow route the rebels would have to use if they attempted to flee. Confident in their plan, the Romans established a blockade. From their perspective, the situation was already over. The gladiators were trapped on the slopes, with steep cliffs on one side and Roman soldiers on the other. There would be no battle, only a slow surrender. But they misunderstood both the terrain and the man leading the rebels. Inside their mountain refuge, Spartacus studied the Roman positions carefully. He realized something crucial. The Romans were guarding the easy path, but leaving the impossible one unguarded. On the far side of the mountain was a sheer, rocky descent covered in wild vines and jagged slopes. To trained soldiers in heavy armor, it looked impassable. To desperate gladiators used to risk and improvisation, it looked like opportunity. Spartacus ordered his men to weave ropes and ladders from the mountain's thick vines. Under cover of darkness, the rebels quietly climbed down the steep, unguarded side of Vesuvius. It was a dangerous descent. One slip could mean death, but they made it. By morning, the gladiators were no longer trapped above the Romans. They were behind them. With speed and surprise, Spartacus led his force straight into the Roman camp. The attack was sudden and chaotic. Roman soldiers, expecting a siege, awoke to find armed gladiators charging into their tents. Disorganized and caught off guard, the militia collapsed. The Roman force was routed. Weapons, armor, and supplies were seized. What Rome had dismissed as a minor slave escape had just turned into a humiliating military defeat. For Spartacus, the victory meant more than survival. It proved that Roman forces could be beaten. And for Rome, it was the first warning that this rebellion was far more dangerous than they had believed. After the shocking victory at Mount Vesuvius, the rebellion led by Spartacus changed overnight. What had begun as a desperate escape was now something far more powerful and far more dangerous. Word spread quickly across southern Italy. On farms, in mines, and inside wealthy Roman estates, slaves heard the same unbelievable rumor. A band of gladiators had defeated Roman troops and survived. For countless enslaved people, this was the first real sign that Rome might not be invincible. They began to run. Small groups slipped away under cover of darkness. Others revolted openly, killing overseers and fleeing into the countryside. They all headed for the same place, Spartacus. Within weeks, the small band of fugitives swelled into thousands. Men, women, and even children joined the growing movement. Many arrived with nothing but stolen tools or farm implements, hoping to trade desperation for freedom. Spartacus understood the danger of chaos. An uncontrolled mob would be easy for Rome to crush. So he did what few expected from a former slave. He built an army. He organized the rebels into units, appointing trusted leaders among the gladiators, including figures like Crassus. Weapons captured from Roman forces were distributed carefully. Training resumed, this time not for the arena, but for real war. Slowly, the army began to resemble a fighting force. And it worked. When Roman forces advanced again, expecting to crush a disorganized rebellion, they instead faced a mobile and determined army. Spartacus avoided fighting on Rome's terms. He used speed, surprise, and knowledge of the countryside to his advantage. Supply lines were raided. Isolated detachments were ambushed. Roman commanders found themselves repeatedly outmaneuvered. Victories followed victories. Praetorian forces were defeated. Consular armies struggled to contain the uprising. Each Roman loss brought more weapons, more confidence, and more recruits. At its height, Spartacus's army may have numbered tens of thousands, perhaps even over 70,000 followers. For the first time, this was no longer just a slave revolt. It was a full-scale war inside Italy itself. Roman landowners panicked, cities feared attack, trade routes became unsafe, and in the Senate, alarm began to replace arrogance. Because the Republic now faced an enemy unlike any it had fought before. Not a foreign king, not a rival general, but an army born from slavery, fighting for freedom. By now, the rebellion led by Spartacus was no longer a minor crisis. Roman armies had been defeated, Italy itself had been shaken, and the Senate could no longer ignore the humiliation. The Republic needed a commander who would treat this war with absolute seriousness. Someone ruthless, disciplined, and willing to spend whatever it took to win. They chose Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was not Rome's greatest battlefield genius, but he possessed something equally important: relentless determination and zero tolerance for failure. Given command of multiple legions, Crassus immediately set out to restore Roman authority in Italy. Previous Roman commanders had suffered from poor discipline and cautious tactics. Crassus believed fear was the only cure. When one of his units retreated in the face of the rebels, he revived an ancient and brutal punishment rarely used in Rome: decimation. Every 10th soldier in the disgraced unit was executed by his own comrades. The message was unmistakable: defeat Spartacus or die trying. With discipline restored through terror, Crassus reorganized the Roman campaign. Instead of chasing Spartacus across Italy, he aimed to contain him. When the rebel army moved south toward the toe of the Italian peninsula, Crassus ordered an extraordinary engineering effort, a massive defensive barrier stretching across the narrow land near Rhegium. Roman soldiers dug trenches, built walls, and fortified the line to trap the rebels in the south and cut them off from supplies. It was a bold strategy. If successful, Spartacus's army would be slowly starved, isolated, and forced into a final confrontation on Roman terms. For the first time since the rebellion began, Spartacus faced an opponent who refused to underestimate him. The war was changing. The final phase of the war had begun. Winter was fading when the rebel army finally understood the truth. The open roads of Italy were gone. For months they had marched freely, defeating Roman forces that underestimated them. But now, the trap was closing. From the north, Roman legions blocked the mountain passes. From the south, patrols and fortifications sealed the coast. Inside this tightening prison, Spartacus knew time was running out. Food was scarce. Morale began to crack. Some groups tried to slip away in the night. Others argued they should march north again. But Spartacus understood what many feared to admit. The rebellion had reached its final chapter. He made his decision. They would not die slowly behind walls. They would break through or fall fighting as free men. Morning came under a pale mist near the Silurus River. On one side stood the army of the Roman Republic, disciplined, armored, and arranged in perfect formation. Shields overlapped, spears angled forward. Officers barked orders in cold precision. On the other side stood Spartacus's army, a fierce, uneven mass of gladiators, escaped slaves, shepherds, miners, and farmers carrying captured Roman weapons. They lacked uniformity, training, and supply, but they possessed something Rome could never give them: nothing left to lose. When the Roman trumpet sounded, the earth itself seemed to tremble. The rebels charged first. Their roar broke across the field like a storm, slamming into the Roman front before the legions could fully lock their formation. For a brief, explosive moment, the Roman line buckled. Steel crashed against shields, spears splintered, dust and blood filled the air. Spartacus fought in the very front. He did not command from safety. He carved forward, cutting through Roman soldiers, trying to reach Crassus himself, a desperate attempt to end the battle in one decisive strike. Ancient accounts describe him wounded in the thigh, yet still standing, still advancing, still striking down anyone who blocked his path. For a moment, it seemed almost possible. But Roman warfare was built for endurance. The first line held long enough for the second to advance. Then the reserves moved in. Then the flanks began to close. Step by step, the discipline of the legions smothered the chaos of the rebel assault. The initial breakthrough stalled. Rebel units became separated. Orders dissolved into survival. The battlefield turned into a slaughter. Still, Spartacus kept fighting. Surrounded, bleeding, and exhausted, he refused to fall back. He fought as if the entire rebellion depended on the next strike, and the next, and the next, until finally, somewhere in that crushing mass of soldiers, Spartacus went down. His body was never definitively identified. It was as if he vanished into the very battle he had created. By the end of the day, the rebellion was finished. But for Rome, victory was not enough. They needed a message. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, the great road leading toward Rome, miles of crosses lining the route as a warning to anyone who might dare to dream of revolt again. Rome had crushed the army. Yet something survived. Spartacus was no longer just a runaway slave or gladiator. He had become something far more dangerous to an empire. A symbol that even in a world built on chains, the idea of freedom could still ignite a war.